Excuse me. You're in the wrong seat. Move. Now. The cold, sharp voice of flight attendant Janet Morrison, 38, sliced through the first-class cabin of American Airlines Flight 447. Like a blade cutting through the polished air of luxury that usually hung there. Every gaze snapped toward a middle-aged black man sitting in seat 2A. Damon Washington, 45, looked up from the thick stack of merger documents in his hands. The silver frames of his glasses caught the cabin light, reflecting eyes that were steady, calm, yet unyielding. He did not flinch at the arrogance in her tone, did not shrink back under the weight of judgment. Just a flicker in his eyes, but enough to reveal the spark quietly burning beneath his composed exterior. Behind Janet stood a white businessman, Brad Hutchinson, 42, shifting impatiently, shaking his head. He cleared his throat loudly, making sure the entire cabin heard him. "Some of us have connections to catch. Can we please move this along?" Damon slowly extended his boarding pass. His voice was low and even, every word steady. "This is my assigned seat, ma'am. 2A. Janet snatched the pass without so much as glancing at it. "Anyone can print fake tickets," she muttered, her voice dripping with disdain, before lifting her finger to point straight at Brad. "This gentleman paid full price for first class. You need to gather your things and move to the back, where you belong." The cabin froze. People held their breath. A young woman in seat 2B, Ashley Carter, 28, quietly pulled out her phone, her thumb tapping the live stream button. On the tiny screen, the red word "Live" glowed. 3 viewers became 10. 10 became 50 as the first comments rolled in. "What's happening? This looks wrong." The intercom crackled overhead. "Flight departure in 18 minutes. Please take your seats." But in 2A, no one sat down. Janet stood firm, arms crossed, her badge catching the sterile glow of the lights, a shield of authority. "Look, I don't have time for games." Her tone grew sharper, louder, projecting for the whole cabin to hear. "We have a legitimate first-class passenger waiting, and you're holding up the entire flight." Brad stepped forward, his silver watch flashing with smug assurance. He smirked. "Finally, someone is handling this properly." His sentence broke off mid-thought, leaving the unspoken words hanging in the air. "Because of who you are." Everyone understood. Damon remained still. Resting on his lap was a worn black leather briefcase stuffed with documents worth hundreds of millions. Yet in that moment, the only thing that mattered was his right to remain in the seat he had paid for. He calmly placed his Platinum Elite card next to the boarding pass. "Ma'am, I've been flying American Airlines for 8 years. Platinum member. This seat is mine." His tone carried the weight of a man who had led negotiations across continents, where entire companies trembled on his decisions. But Janet dismissed it with a wave of her hand. "I see knockoff cards all the time. Anyone can fake these nowadays." Ashley gripped her phone tighter, the live stream frame trembling with her quickened breath. The viewer count surged past 200. Comments flooded in. "This is discrimination. Don't back down." A couple in the back whispered to each other, the husband shaking his head. "This isn't right." In 4C, another businessman frowned, staring blankly at his laptop, unable to focus. The whispers spread like wildfire through the cabin. Brad chimed in again, his voice dripping with condescension. "Just move along, buddy. Some of us have real business to conduct." He dropped into an empty aisle seat with the arrogance of a man convinced he owned the room. Damon's phone buzzed. A message from his assistant lit up the screen. "Board meeting tomorrow. Final vote on AA partnership." He silenced it with a press of his finger, his gaze steady, unbroken. A bitter irony tugged at his mind. Tomorrow, the board would debate diversity and equity policy, yet today he was being treated like a fraud in the very first class cabin of that same airline. Janet leaned in, lowering her voice, sharp enough to cut, but loud enough only for him. "Either you move voluntarily, or we'll have security escort you off." In that instant, Damon saw the entire picture. The dismissive eyes, the silent complicity, Brad's smirk, Janet's false authority. Together they formed a verdict against him, delivered without trial, based on nothing but the color of his skin. But Damon Washington was no ordinary man. He drew a slow, deep breath, his heart steady, his expression calm. Amid the murmurs swirling through the cabin, the corners of his mouth lifted in the faintest of smiles, not the smile of surrender, but of someone who knew the storm had only just begun, and the final defeat would not be his. Inside the black leather case on his lap rested more than just contracts worth hundreds of millions. It held a card of power strong enough to change the fate of the entire airline. No one, not even Janet, had the faintest idea. The overhead speaker blared, "Flight departure in 15 minutes. Final boarding call." The announcements grew sharper, more urgent, and time itself became a weapon in Janet Morrison's hands. She folded her arms, her eyes narrowing with arrogance. "Sir, you're officially delaying this flight. That's a federal offense." The words cracked out like an indictment. The first-class cabin fell silent. Passengers sat tense, watching as though witnessing a public trial. Beside Damon, Ashley Carter discreetly shifted her phone, adjusting the angle of her live stream. The viewer count spiked past 1,200, comments flooding the screen. "This is insane. Why is he being treated like this? Call the news." Damon sat upright, his eyes deep, his hands loosely clasped. He had faced billion-dollar negotiations, but never had a single airline seat turned into such a ruthless battleground. He knew too well, one sudden move, one sharp retort, and he would be branded aggressive. That label would serve as Janet's proof and anyone's justification to bury his voice. At that moment, a figure emerged from economy. Marcus, a young black flight attendant, only 25, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes conflicted. His voice dropped low, just enough for Janet to hear. "Janet, his boarding pass clearly shows seat 2A. Janet's icy glare crushed his fragile courage. "Marcus, return to your section. I'm handling this." Her words were a blade. Marcus hesitated, then retreated, but his face said it all. He knew, and others knew too, something here was profoundly wrong. A current ran through the cabin. Some passengers shook their heads. A middle-aged man muttered, "This is crazy." Another spoke louder, "Just let the man sit in his seat." But Janet did not hear, or more truthfully, she would not allow herself to hear. Authority, when draped in uniform and pinned with a badge, could harden into a wall. To step back was to smash that wall herself. To lose face before her colleagues, to lose her shield before passengers. Janet had climbed too high on the ladder of arrogance to turn back now. Damon tilted his head slightly, unfastened his leather case, and pulled out a business card. A harmless motion, yet Janet's eyes snapped with suspicion. "Sir, close that. We're not running a mobile office here. Prepare to relocate." Her voice was laced with threat. "Perhaps if you contact your supervisor," Damon began, but Janet cut him off immediately. "I don't need to contact anyone. I have full authority in this cabin." The declaration crashed down like cold water over everyone present, a raw proclamation of power, a statement that in this first-class cabin, she was the law. Ashley's grip on her phone tightened, her heart pounding. The live stream surged past 3,000 viewers. Hashtags began to appear. At flight discrimination, #AA447. She knew that every word, every glare, every mug gesture from Janet was becoming evidence, broadcast in real time to the world. Brad Hutchinson, the man poised to claim seat 2A, began to shrink back. He had wanted the seat, but not like this. His initial satisfaction curdled into unease as the situation spun out of control. He glanced at Damon, then at Janet, his lips parting as if to say, "Maybe we should just—" But Janet cut him off sharply, her voice slicing the air. "Company policy is clear. This passenger will comply or be removed." The clock ticked on, each minute carving into the crew's throats. 13 minutes to departure. The tension pressed down, suffocating the luxury cabin until it resembled a courtroom, where one wrong verdict could ignite a firestorm of global media. Damon sat motionless, drawing in a slow, steady breath. In his mind, a question echoed. How many other black passengers have been forced out of their seats like this, with no cameras, no witnesses, no one to believe them? His hand tightened on the handle of his case, his eyes flicking toward Ashley, the young woman trembling yet resolute, holding her camera steady. He gave her the smallest nod, invisible to all but her. A silent thank you. Janet gripped her radio, her voice hard and cutting through the cabin. "Ground control. This is Morrison on flight 447. I need a supervisor and security to gate B7 immediately. We have an uncooperative passenger refusing to follow crew instructions." Ashley nearly choked on her breath. The viewer count soared 200, 3,800, 4,000. Comments poured in. "Record everything." "Where's the manager?" "This is going viral." In that moment, Damon Washington sat still, his presence immovable, like a stone in the storm. Yet behind his calm exterior, a plan was already forming, a move only he knew, one that would transform today's humiliation into a costly lesson for an entire airline empire. Footsteps pounded from the back of the cabin. The galley door swung open, and a woman in uniform stepped out. 3 gold stripes gleamed on her shoulder. Rosa Martinez, 40, a chief flight attendant with 15 years of experience. The moment she appeared, she radiated the authority Janet had been clinging to. "What's the issue here?" Rosa asked, her voice steady, though her eyes leaned toward Janet. Janet immediately pointed at Damon, her hand waving as if brandishing evidence of a crime. "Passenger in 2A, refusing to relocate for a paying customer. presenting fraudulent documentation. He's delaying our departure." Brad Hutchinson nodded quickly, piling on. "Yes, I paid full fare. This is ridiculous." His voice was louder than necessary, as though he wanted the entire cabin to confirm his legitimacy. Damon said nothing. He opened his case, pulled out his boarding pass and Platinum Elite card, and handed them to Rosa with steady hands, neither trembling nor rushed. His gaze seemed to say, "Look closely. Do not let bias blind you." Rosa glanced at the card, but Janet leaned in and whispered something in her ear, a short phrase that made Rosa's face tighten slightly. A subtle change, yet clear enough for passengers paying attention, and for Ashley Carter, through her live stream lens, to capture every detail. Rosa cleared her throat and returned the documents. "Sir, these disputes happen frequently. Company policy is to resolve with minimal disruption. We can offer you a seat in premium economy." Murmurs erupted. An elderly woman in 3A whispered, "But his ticket says 2A." A businessman in 4C shook his head in disbelief. Ashley adjusted her phone, muttering under her breath, "They're downgrading him. This is insane." Her viewer count surged toward 5,000, the hashtag #flight discrimination exploding across the feed. At that moment, another voice broke in, low and firm, carrying a trace of weariness. "Evening, folks." A tall man in an airport vest stepped into the cabin. Mike Stevens, 50, ground supervisor, with 20 years of experience handling disputes. Yet the moment he arrived, he was drawn into Janet's scripted version of events. Fraudulent documentation, refusing crew instructions, disrupting passengers, delaying departure window. Janet rattled off as if reciting a report. Mike nodded, his eyes settling on Damon. For a moment, he weighed his options, then leaned toward the safest choice for himself. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step off the aircraft so we can resolve this properly." The cabin erupted in whispers. "This is discrimination," one passenger cried out. "Check his documents properly," another demanded. Yet voices also cut through. "Just move him so we can leave. I have a connection." The cabin split in two, half outraged, half indifferent. Damon stood at the center, the eye of a social storm before the plane had even left the ground. Ashley zoomed in, her eyes wide. Her live stream now reached viewers in over a dozen countries, with thousands of comments flooding in. "Record everything. Boycott AA. This is going viral." In the midst of crushing pressure, Damon remained still. He quietly secured his case, his eyes moving from Mike to Janet, then to Rosa. He did not argue, did not resist, because he knew this was only the prelude. He thought, tomorrow they will realize they gambled an entire airline over a single first-class seat, and they will regret it. At the left of the cabin, a security officer entered, her navy uniform crisp, her belt polished. Patricia Williams, 35, walked in with calm authority. She was the only responder of color, and with one glance, she understood the situation was far more complicated than Janet's report. "Evening, everyone," Patricia said, her voice steady yet commanding. "Can someone explain the situation?" Rosa quickly stepped in. "The passenger refuses to comply with crew instructions. We need him removed." Patricia looked directly at Damon, extending her hand. "Sir, may I see your documentation?" Once again, Damon handed them over. Patricia examined carefully. Boarding pass. Valid. Platinum Elite card. Authentic. Seat 2A. Correct. Everything in order. She looked up, speaking slowly. These documents appear valid. The cabin froze. A flicker of hope lit in the eyes of a few passengers, but Mike cut in swiftly, shutting it down. The airline crew has discretionary authority. Federal regulations support crew decisions. Patricia hesitated, her eyes clouded with regret. She knew the truth, but she also knew the law placed power squarely in Janet and Rosa's hands. She stood on the fragile line between justice and procedure. The announcement rang out. Departure in 8 minutes. Boarding doors closing soon. The ticking clock crushed hesitation into dust. Rosa, her voice cold as steel, delivered the decision. Sir, comply immediately, or be removed and banned from future American Airlines flights. The cabin held its breath. Damon tilted his head slightly, his eyes flashing with a light no one could quite read. He rose slowly, his calm demeanor sending a chill through the room. Janet's lips curled in a fleeting smirk, certain she had won. But what she did not know was that Damon's rise was not surrender. It was the first step toward an unraveling that would shake the entire airline. The sharp click echoed as Damon Washington lifted the leather briefcase from his seat. First class fell silent, broken only by the soft murmur of phones live streaming. Ashley Carter's hands trembled as she held her camera steady, viewers surging past 12,000, comments pouring in. He's calm. Something's coming. Don't blink. This is big. Damon did not rush. He stepped out of 2A with an almost eerie composure, like a general walking into battle with the map of victory already in his grasp. His eyes swept over Janet, then Rosa, then Mike Stevens. 3 faces burning with authority, yet in Damon's gaze, they looked no more than pawns placing themselves on the sacrificial square. Janet's voice cut sharp, mocking. Should have moved when I asked nicely. She thought she had won, unaware that Damon's patient smile had been the calm before the storm. He gave a slight nod to Patricia Williams, the security officer still standing there, her expression conflicted. Then, from his briefcase, Damon pulled out a thick, silver-edged business card. He handed it directly to Rosa, his voice low and firm, each syllable striking like a hammer. Before I leave, there are people you should call. Cabin lights caught the embossed letters, each one gleaming. Damon Washington, Chief Executive Officer. Washington Capital Partners. The air shifted violently. Rosa blinked as though the words were dancing. Janet froze, her smirk vanishing. Mike Stevens stepped back half a pace, eyes straining to make sure he was not mistaken. Damon continued, his voice steady, each word a strike. Please call your district manager immediately. Tell Carmen Rodriguez that Washington Capital Partners needs to discuss our American Airlines investment. First class erupted in whispers. Ashley nearly shouted into her stream. Oh my God, he owns part of the airline. Viewers skyrocketed. 18,000, 19,000, 20,000. A new hashtag surged. #, he owns the airline. Brad Hutchinson, who had boasted of his full fare, turned pale. His champagne glass rattled in his hand, foam spilling over. The man who believed himself privileged now realized he had played the fool in a scene that would go down in history. Damon wasn't done. He produced another card, this one bearing the embossed American Airlines logo, bold legal text beneath it. Preferred stock certificate, Series A voting rights, 23.7% ownership interest. A gasp rippled through the cabin. The businessman in 4C dropped his laptop to the floor. The elderly couple in 3A clutched each other as though to confirm they were not dreaming. For the first time all flight, Janet was speechless. She collapsed into an empty seat, her face drained of color. 12 years of experience, every ounce of authority her uniform gave her, evaporated in seconds. Damon lifted his head, addressing both the passengers and the crew. His voice lowered, but each word struck like a drumbeat. We acquired this position last month. $847 million in preferred stock. Tomorrow's board meeting was set to finalize our diversity initiative. Tonight, his eyes cut directly into Janet's. You just provided the most expensive case study in airline history. The live stream exploded. Comments no longer trickled, but flooded the screen. He owns the airline. Discrimination caught live. This will cost them billions. Viewership soared past 25,000, then 30,000 in minutes. Patricia Williams, the only member of the response team not swept up in arrogance, slowly stepped back. A trace of respect flickered across her face. She had sensed injustice from the start, but now, seeing this reversal, she knew history was being rewritten right here in first class. Janet stammered, lips trembling. "Sir, I didn't know." Damon cut her off, his voice cold as steel. "That was the point." The cabin held its breath. A single twist had overturned the entire order. The man they had deemed unworthy of first class had revealed the truth. He was not only worthy, he held the power to determine the airline's future. And this was only the beginning. The first-class cabin was frozen in place, the only sound the crackle of the overhead speaker. "Departure in 12 minutes. Final boarding call for Flight 447. But no one cared about the flight anymore. Every eye was locked on Damon Washington, the man who had just transformed from a suspect passenger into the most powerful shareholder in the room. Calmly, he placed his leather briefcase on the tray table, opening it like a chest of treasures. Inside were thick stacks of documents, stamped with bold red seals. Contract, shareholder agreements, financial analyses, all spread out as irrefutable proof. Damon lifted his phone, a single swipe lighting up the screen with American Airlines' stock chart. His voice was low, but every word struck like a hammer. Stock price has already dropped $230 per share in the last 15 minutes. With 1.8 billion shares outstanding, that's a market cap reduction of over $4 billion, all because of this incident. A collective gasp erupted through the cabin. Rosa Martinez went pale, her hand clenching the armrest. Mike Stevens broke into a sweat. His face contorted as if a pit had just opened beneath him. Ashley Carter trembled with excitement, her camera shaking wildly. Viewers on the live stream surged past 35,000. Major outlets jumping in. CNN just joined the stream. BBC picking this up. This is history. Damon pressed on, flipping pages like a prosecutor delivering charges. Our institutional investors include BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. They're all monitoring this live stream right now for ESG compliance violations. He looked up, eyes icy, locking on Janet Morrison. Your actions tonight are not just poor service. They are a material risk to shareholder value. Janet shook uncontrollably. For 12 years she had believed her power came from forcing passengers to obey. But now Damon had exposed the truth. One careless word, one contemptuous glance, could wipe billions off the company's books. Brad Hutchinson, the smug businessman, shrank in his seat. He stammered, I didn't know. This was a misunderstanding. Damon cut him off without even glancing his way. No misunderstanding, Mr. Hutchinson. You validated discrimination. That makes you complicit. The verdict fell like a gavel, and Brad collapsed back into his seat, his face drained of blood. Patricia Williams, the security officer, stepped forward half a pace. Her voice wavered, but was steady enough to carry. Sir, I know this isn't right. I apologize for what you've been through. Damon turned to her, and for the first time since becoming the center of the storm, his tone softened. Officer Williams, you did your duty with dignity, unlike them. The cabin went silent. One small gesture, but it drew a clear line between light and shadow. On one side, respect. On the other, collapse. Damon's phone buzzed with a new message from his assistant. Washington Post asking for comment on AA investment. He silenced it, then looked up, his voice resonant. Tonight's incident is no longer a customer dispute. It's a federal civil rights compliance case. And every phone here has already submitted the evidence to the court of public opinion. Ashley whispered into her lens, voice trembling. This is the most expensive customer service failure in history. Viewers surged past 50,000. Hashtag flight discrimination, rocketing to the top of trending. In that moment, Damon was no longer just a passenger demanding justice. He had become a financial strategist, turning humiliation into a weapon of destruction. One denied first, class seat had transformed into $1 billion lesson for an Etante airline. And this was only the first bell. The first-class cabin of flight AA447 now felt like an impromptu shareholders' meeting. Passengers sat in silence, the crew stiff with tension, every phone camera capturing each breath. Viewers on Ashley Carter's live stream passed 65,000. The world was watching. Damon Washington stood tall, his voice deep yet resonant, as if this narrow cabin had transformed into the hall of a global summit. He raised a thick binder, its red label stamped with the words, Confidential Board Proposal, Washington Protocol. Tonight's incident was not an accident, Damon declared. It was proof of systemic bias, and that is why Washington Capital Partners prepared a 5-point reform plan for American Airlines. He opened the first page, his tone steady and resolute. Point 1. Mandatory bias recognition training. Every frontline employee will undergo 40 hours of required training. No exceptions, no excuses. This is not a suggestion, it is a condition. Janet Morrison turned pale, each word stabbing into her career. Damon lifted the second document. Point 2. Real. Time discrimination monitoring. An artificial intelligence system will analyze interactions between crew and passengers. Alerts will be sent instantly to supervisors when bias is detected. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Some passengers shook their heads in disbelief. Mike Stevens swallowed hard, realizing that hidden cameras and algorithms would now become inescapable eyes and ears. The third page landed like a verdict. Point 3. Independent Civil Rights Ombudsman. This office will report directly to the CEO of the airline, empowered to investigate and terminate any employee who violates standards. Rosa Martinez felt her legs weaken. In that instant, she understood. The authority she once trusted as her shield was about to vanish. Damon folded the binder slightly, then reopened it at the next section. Point 4. Quarterly diversity audits. Independent civil rights organizations will conduct audits every quarter. Results will be published publicly. Every number, every report will be under the scrutiny of the public and federal regulators. The sound of rapid typing filled the cabin. Another passenger, live streaming, whispered, "This is historic. They'll have to comply." Damon raised the final page, his voice dropping lower, each word weighted like lead. Point 5. $50 million Diversity Scholarship Fund. The airline will be required to establish a fund to train the next generation of black and minority pilots and crew. Change cannot remain a promise. It must be an investment. The cabin trembled. An elderly woman sobbed softly, whispering, "Finally, justice." Damon closed the binder, his gaze sweeping across every face. Janet kept her head down, her lips trembling, but no sound escaping. Brad Hutchinson sat frozen, his hand trembling uncontrollably. Rosa Martinez, after 15 years of service, now felt her uniform like a set of chains. Damon lowered his tone, and that quietness made the weight even heavier. American Airlines has 24 hours to accept these terms. If not, Washington Capital Partners will divest our $847 million position, and BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street will follow. You know exactly what that means. He lifted his phone, the glowing screen displaying real-time numbers. The stock chart bled red, plunging without mercy. Passengers gasped as one. This was no longer a dispute over a seat. This was a financial death sentence for an empire unless it changed. Patricia Williams looked at Damon, her eyes filled with respect and relief. She whispered softly, just enough for those near her to hear. "Sir, you just turned injustice into a revolution." Damon turned, giving her a small nod. It was not the smile of triumph, but of a man who understood. True justice does not win a single argument. It changes an entire system. The cabin remained silent, but outside, across social media, the storm had begun to roar, and it would not stop until American Airlines bowed its head. The crackle of Rosa's radio filled the cabin. "District Manager Rodriguez en route. ETA 2 minutes." Every eye shifted to the cabin door. No one cared about the looming delay anymore. They were counting the seconds until someone higher in rank walked in and was pulled straight into the storm Janet had unleashed. Damon Washington folded the binder neatly, slid it back into his leather case, and sat with the calm composure of a man who had just concluded a boardroom presentation, not a battle in an airplane cabin. Outside the door, Hurried footsteps grew louder. Then it opened. Carmen Rodriguez, 49, district manager of American Airlines, stepped in with the look of someone who had just sprinted through chaos. 23 years with the airline had taught her composure, but never had she faced a disaster being live-streamed to tens of thousands of people. "Washington," Carmen said the instant she spotted the business card in Rosa's hand. "I deeply apologize for this unprecedented situation." Her voice rasped, but Damon allowed no room for sentiment. Sitting tall, his eyes ablaze, his words cut like blades. "Ms. Rodriguez, apologies don't fix systemic rot. Your employees humiliated a Platinum Elite member. Worse, they profiled a major shareholder as a fraud. Do you understand the cost of that?" Carmen faltered. She had assumed this was a minor issue, a stubborn passenger. But staring into Damon's eyes, she realized this was a public trial, with the entire world as jury. Brad Hutchinson, who had once gloated, half rose, his voice cracking. "Mr. Washington, I sincerely apologize. I never meant to." Damon turned, slicing his words down. "Your phrase, 'learn your place,' is already trending worldwide. It will be Exhibit A in every diversity training this company funds. Your complicity is recorded, archived, and immortalized." Brad collapsed back into his seat, face drained of color, knowing his career had turned to ash. Carmen swallowed hard, opened her tablet, and scrolled through crisis reports with trembling hands. On the screen, stock down 11% pre-market, hashtags, #flight discrimination, and #he owns. The airline trending worldwide. Damon leaned slightly forward, his voice low, yet heavier than a shout. "Ms. Rodriguez, Washington Capital Partners has given your company 24 hours. Implement the Washington Protocol, or watch us divest $847 million. And when we divest, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street will follow. That is $2.3 billion erased in one stroke." The cabin froze. Janet Morrison slumped, burying her face in despair. Rosa Martinez gripped the armrest tightly, head bowed low. Mike Stevens stood hollow, eyed as if hearing his own death sentence. Ashley Carter swept her phone across the cabin, whispering to her audience, "You're watching corporate history in real time." Viewers surged past 80,000, with international outlets joining. New York Times just pinned the stream. Al Jazeera covering now. Carmen drew a deep breath, locking eyes with Damon. Fear mingled with reluctant acknowledgement. "Mr. Washington, we will comply. I will escalate this to the board immediately." Damon leaned back slightly, his gaze softening for the first time. He knew this was not just a personal victory. It was a turning point, forcing a giant corporation to kneel before justice. Snapping his case shut, his voice landed firm and final. "Then let's begin. Because tonight, American Airlines learned a simple truth. Discrimination is expensive." Ashley Carter gripped her phone tightly, her heart pounding. Viewers had surged past 100,000. With every passing second, the number spiked like a seismic graph. Comments flooded in. "This is corporate collapse live." He just destroyed them with facts. Never flying AA again. At the back of the cabin, another passenger flipped open a laptop, broadcasting Ashley's stream directly onto Twitter. Within 10 minutes, CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera were all breaking the same headline. CEO investor humiliated on board American Airlines flight. Damon Washington sat motionless, as if in the eye of a storm, his calm making him the most unshakable force in the room. But it was that very composure that sent cold wet down the spines of Rosa Martinez and Mike Stevens. They understood now. Every word he spoke had already traveled far beyond this cabin. It had become a global message. Carmen Rodriguez stared into her tablet, lines of breaking updates flashing relentlessly. Stock down 12.4% in after hours trading. AA faces potential class action lawsuit. Hanshantrant flight discrimination and Hashash he owns. The airline trending #1 worldwide. Carmen felt her knees weaken. In 23 years she had weathered delays, engine failures, lost luggage, but never had a single seat, 2A, threatened to tear the airline apart. Damon opened his case, pulling out a folder stamped with a federal seal. He placed it on the tray table like a final trump card. The FAA received our civil rights compliance testing protocol 3 weeks ago. Tonight's incident is now part of the federal record. A ripple of whispers surged through the cabin. One passenger murmured, "He set them up. This was a test." Ashley whispered into her stream, "It's not just a test. It's a trap they walked right into." Janet Morrison's face was drained of all color, her hands clutching the seat armrest as if for survival. Every word from Damon sliced into the career she once wore with pride. To the passengers, she was no longer a steward of authority, but the living emblem of prejudice laid bare. Brad Hutchinson bowed his head, his trembling hand gripping an empty glass. The words "learn your place" that he had once thrown so casually had now become a global hashtag and the end of his personal reputation. Damon lifted his gaze, sweeping across each face before locking eyes with the camera in Ashley's hand. His voice rang out, clear and resolute, for the world to hear. This is not about one passenger. This is about every person who has ever been told they don't belong where they rightfully earned to be. Tonight, American Airlines pays the price. Applause erupted from the back rows, at first scattered, then rising, spreading, until the entire cabin thundered with clapping hands. The silence had broken. The passengers were no longer bystanders. They were with Damon. Patricia Williams, the security officer, stepped forward. Her voice carried steady, like an oath. "Sir, your composure tonight. It's the definition of dignity under fire. I will testify to that." Carmen Rodriguez swallowed hard, glancing at Damon, then around the cabin where every glowing phone lens still captured the moment. She knew with absolute clarity this was no longer just American Airlines' crisis. This was a rupture shaking the entire industry. And in her mind echoed a single truth. If they did not concede, the entire empire would collapse. The applause faded, but the air in the cabin remained dense, like a courtroom under judgment. The entire world was watching. Carmen Rodriguez knew with certainty that every second of hesitation meant millions more vanishing from market value. She stood tall, her voice tight with emotion, yet forced into firmness. "Mr. Washington, on behalf of American Airlines, I acknowledge this failure. Effective immediately, Janet Morrison is suspended pending full investigation. Mike Stevens is relieved of supervisory duties. Rosa Martinez will undergo mandatory bias retraining before returning to service. A wave of murmurs swept through the cabin. Janet seemed drained of all strength, collapsing into her seat, her eyes clouded with tears. Rosa kept her head bowed, hands clasped tightly, her shoulders trembling. Mike stood frozen, his face ashen, like a statue beginning to crack. Ashley steadied her camera, her voice breaking. "You're watching history, accountability, live." Viewers surged past 120,000. Comments flooded in. "Finally justice. She's fired." "This is the power of truth." Brad Hutchinson, once so arrogant, now stammered, his voice shaking. "Mr. Washington, I sincerely apologize for my words. I should never have." Damon turned toward him, his gaze icy. "Your apology is noted, but insufficient. American Airlines will implement a passenger conduct database. Your behavior tonight will be the first entry." Brad collapsed into his seat, his body shrinking, fully aware that his career had just turned to ashes. Patricia Williams, the security officer, stepped forward. She looked from Carmen to Damon, her voice resolute. "Sir, I will testify to everything I saw, to how calm you remained, to how unjust this treatment was." Damon gave a slight nod, his expression softening. "Officer Williams, you carried yourself with dignity. That will be documented. Not all in uniform failed tonight." Carmen drew in a deep breath, then turned directly to Ashley's live-stream camera, a decision without precedent. "American Airlines accepts the Washington Protocol. We will implement all 5 reforms, effective immediately." First class erupted with applause. Passengers leapt to their feet, cheering as though they had just witnessed the knockout blow of a grueling fight. Ashley shook with excitement, tears streaming down her face. "You all just saw it. They surrendered." Damon closed his leather case, his voice steady and resonant. "Good. Because this is no longer about a seat. This is about restoring dignity. Tonight, you learned a truth every corporation must face. Discrimination is expensive. Accountability is priceless." In that moment, first class was no longer a sanctuary for the privileged. It had transformed into a symbol of justice, where one man once dismissed was able to make a giant corporation bow its head. 24 hours later, inside the American Airlines headquarters, the boardroom was flooded with harsh lights and an atmosphere heavy with gloom. CEO Robert Carter, 50 pounds 2, stood before a massive screen, clutching the emergency report in his hand. His voice trembled. "Stock dropped 11% overnight. We lost $1.2 billion in market value. Hashtag flight discrimination dominated global trending for 18 hours straight." The directors sat in silence, the only sound the nervous tapping of a pen against the table. Finally, the legal director spoke. "Washington Capital Partners has doubled their position. They now hold even greater sway over our future. The board has no choice but to comply." Robert Carter bowed his head. "Janet Morrison, terminated effective immediately. Mike Stevens, suspended without pay, stripped of supervisory rights. Rosa Martinez, reassigned and placed under probation." He drew in a long breath, then forced the words through gritted teeth. and the Washington Protocol is now our law. Meanwhile, on social media, Ashley Carter had become the face of justice. Her live stream surpassed 2.8 million views in a single day. CNN and BBC fought to secure interviews. A new hashtag surged. Number 35,000 feet to justice. Patricia Williams received thousands of letters of gratitude. She was praised for her calm and fairness, the perfect foil to Janet's arrogance. Brad Hutchinson lost his consulting contract overnight. His firm released a statement. "We do not tolerate discriminatory behavior. He no longer represents us." The shockwaves spread beyond American Airlines. Delta, United, and Southwest simultaneously announced expanded bias training programs. The FAA issued new regulations requiring all discrimination complaints to be filed within 24 hours. Congress scheduled hearings on systemic bias in aviation. The press called it the 2A crisis, an upheaval born from a single first-class seat that rattled an entire industry. 6 months later, Damon Washington stepped onto the stage at the Aviation Diversity Summit. The hall was packed, camera flashes firing relentlessly. His voice rang clear. "Dignity is not negotiable. When we demanded accountability, we didn't just change one airline. We reshaped an industry." The numbers proved his words. Discrimination complaints in aviation dropped 47%. Revenue from black business travelers rose 31%, and a $50 million scholarship fund had already placed dozens of students into pilot training programs. The room erupted in thunderous applause. Damon bowed his head slightly, his eyes glinting with a trace of pride. And in business classrooms, the name Janet Morrison became a classic case study. The most expensive customer service mistake in aviation history. On social media, people still repeated the words that rewrote history at 35,000 feet. Discrimination is expensive. Accountability is priceless. In a world where a single first-class seat can wipe out billions, the story of Damon Washington reminds us of an undeniable truth. Human dignity has no price tag, yet it carries a devastating cost for those who dare to disregard it. A flight attendant believed that power resided in a uniform. A passenger assumed that privilege lay in the color of his skin. But in the end, only one truth prevailed. Justice always finds its voice, even at 35,000 feet. If you believe that every person deserves respect, hit like to spread this message. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next stories about justice, dignity, and change. And leave a comment with just the words, "Dignity first." So the world knows that wherever we are, respect must always soar higher than everything else.